And you might have seen or heard about a version of this session which took place in AOM Boston last year. And given our current situation, we thought it would be great to bring it back and then let our amazing speakers to reach a wider audience this time to talk about online teaching, the do's and don'ts, and asynchronous versus synchronous, and any other online teaching related question that you might have. So we have tonight Glenn Hertzker from Melbourne Business School, and we have Anu Wadhwa from Imperial College, and Chris Bingham from UNC will be joining us. He's just finishing up teaching and he'll be joining us in a few minutes. I'm Pinar Oskan. I'm one of the organizers, and I have with me Giada Di Stefano and Itai Stern and Peter Merman as my co-organizers here. And without further ado, I want to just give the word to our speakers. They'll have each 15 minutes to present. They have slides. And if you have clarification questions, we will be handling them right away afterwards, but only if it's just clarification. Otherwise, if it's a question that could be asked to all three speakers, then we'll let those to the end. Giada will be looking at the questions on the chat function. So if you have questions, please use chat. And she will be basically asking those questions to the speakers once their presentations are over. Otherwise, if you have a technical issue, we have our wonderful STR division host, and you can email her, you can chat with her directly as well. And I think that's pretty much it. So without further ado, I'll give the word to Glenn. Glad to have you with us.
All right, good morning or afternoon, whatever it is where you are, everyone. Nice to be here. So it's interesting to give this again after the changes we've all been going through. And I was thinking about what would be most valuable. And I think, in fact, while I have a better understanding of what I presented last time, the content holds up pretty nicely. So I want to talk about what's missing in the online classroom, because a lot of us have moved from the physical classroom to the online classroom pretty quickly. And I found that my online teaching, whether synchronous or asynchronous, became better when I figured out the pieces that weren't there that I had just taken for granted in the classroom. And, you know, I think as all of us have jumped from the physical to the virtual classroom, we've probably experienced something a little bit like this. Probably with less warning. So, a little bit of background that I'm drawing on. So I taught for 7 years in the online MBA at Arizona State, taught the strategy capstone. It was a 5-week entirely online asynchronous class. I just on Sunday wrapped up teaching our Executive MBA innovation class here at Melbourne Business School. This was originally scheduled as an in-person class. A scheduling quirk that would have been difficult in that case became really challenging in this case, because it meant the students had to deal with me for 7.5 hours every day on Zoom for 3.5 days. Lesson 1, don't do that. They were fantastic. We had a great educational experience, but that is not an approach I would recommend. And that was entirely synchronous. I also come at this as a parent of an adult student who struggles very much with online teaching. And I think one of the challenges many universities are discovering, many of us are discovering in this room, is there is an important group of learners for whom online is particularly challenging. And I think we're still learning how to optimally support them. And I think that's really important. So there are a number of things that are missing when we move online. And of course, I'm very conscious of this as I'm presenting right now. One is, it's much easier in the classroom to gauge comprehension. It's a full body thing, and it's, I think, something we do intuitively. But we all know the experience of looking out into a sea of faces and recognizing that explanation did not work. We don't have that on Zoom, even when everyone has their screens on, and I strongly encourage my students to have their screen on, very strongly recommend that. It's still just not the same. And students are typically more resistant about putting their hands up in whatever form that means, just to say, wait, I wasn't quite sure about that. So recognize you're going to have trouble gauging comprehension. Further, attention spans are limited. There's a lot of research out there that points out that being part of Zoom meetings is more draining than being part of physical meetings. A lot of it has to do, from what I understand, just from the little bit I've read, with the difficulty of reading the signals off the other people. But recognize that you're dealing with much more limited attention spans than in the classroom. There's also a challenge in the classroom or online. There are things you can do to show people how to do something. But that's often not enough. And I'm not sure we recognize how much we can do in the physical classroom to actually help the student, to support them. The things we do wandering around the classroom during an exercise, the various ways we can give very direct feedback. Doable, but much harder in the virtual classroom, and something that unless we put effort into, we probably won't do just because we're not used to it. And the other piece is that failure is very likely on the student's first attempt at something new, or realistically at our first attempt to do something new. But in the physical classroom, it's easier to pick up on the fact that failure has occurred and to do something to rectify it. And then there's the issue of homework. I have found homework in the online setting to be more demanding, particularly in the asynchronous setting. It's our one opportunity to get feedback on how the students are doing and to give meaningful feedback. Particularly in the asynchronous world, there's often not the opportunity to do the 10 minutes at the end, now let's sum up the case based on what everyone has said. So I find that providing quality marking is more important, particularly in asynchronous, and that's very time consuming. So the other part is that if we're not careful, if we're relying on multiple choice, etc., the students can successfully complete an exercise without really mastering it, which will come and bite us later as we try and build on that project. And lastly, people get frustrated. Depending how quickly you have had to switch to new tools, it's just going to not work necessarily, and people will get fed up with it. So, bunch of problems. Let me offer some suggestions, and that this can help drive some of our discussion. One thing you can do that solves multiple problems is to keep lessons short. I try not to go, if it's purely asynchronous, 10 minutes is probably the most I could put a video up. Synchronous, I wouldn't go more than 15 minutes without stopping. At a minimum, opening things up for discussion, but more likely having the students do something. And if you're teaching in Zoom or another platform that makes breakout rooms possible, I highly recommend sending the students to breakout rooms to discuss, bring them back, spend 5 minutes talking about what people learned in their breakout groups. One of the advantages we have actually found is we have typically organized students into syndicates groups, and that's what that's how they always went and did breakout groups, because it solved having to sort them. Something nice about Zoom, at least, is it can dump people into random groups. And we have found that actually is something the students have appreciated. They've gotten to know more of their colleagues. So that's an option. Building on this, if your institution will provide you a moderator, that is incredibly valuable. I have someone who takes care of splitting people into the rooms, setting the rooms up. It has made all the difference that I haven't had to focus on that. So if you don't have that, I encourage you to push for it. Create opportunities to gauge comprehension without evaluation. So if you're doing something asynchronous, most packages now can be tied in some way up with quizzes that the students can take. Have that be, but really low consequence, maybe even no evaluation. It's just a check. Discussion boards, particularly asynchronously, give an opportunity for really seeing how students understand something and maybe stepping in and correcting miscomprehensions. I have found those very powerful and not bad even in the synchronous setting. And then I try and set more flexible office hours with online students, particularly in the asynchronous case. It probably means they're working full time. And if I were to simply say my office hours are Thursday 2 to 3, there are going to be a bunch of students who can't meet me. I've actually, with my executives, given them my phone number. No one has taken me up on it, but I think that sort of availability for students who feel cut off from the professor generates tremendous amounts of goodwill. Balance group and individual work. You're not going to be able to grade 80 online assignments each time. On the other hand, some individual work is going to be valuable. Even more than in the physical classroom, I think asking why questions really helps draw out that success without full comprehension. And I think that's a very powerful tool that I'm probably going to bring more of into my physical teaching, which I'm sure we'll get back to being able to do at some point. Students need more feedback. They have trouble reading us. And so it's very valuable to provide clearer feedback. Something I've done that students seem to highly appreciate is after grading an assignment, I might do a 7 to 10 minute video casually on my back porch that says, so here are 2 points that people seem to regularly not get. Let me try explaining them again, because I clearly didn't do a good job the first time. One thing that provides in very practical terms is when the students come and complain about the grading, you can say, well, did you watch the video? Because I touched on it in the video. And that's a screen that will eliminate 85% of your grade grubbers because they can't be bothered to watch the video. And for the students who do care and do want to really learn, it's very helpful. B, do more accumulation and be clearer about it. So we, when I was at ASU, we went through 5 forces and internal analysis and bringing them together using the same case. And this was in different modules. And it allowed the students to revisit the case, to get the feedback on their 5 forces and revise it. And I think there's more variety, particularly in the asynchronous, in accumulating than a lot of variety. Doing fewer cases, perhaps for multiple purposes, can be helpful. Be hyper organized. There's something about the online setting that students find it, particularly if it's asynchronous, so they're left at least partially on their own to do it. It's harder to follow. There is no room for winging it online. I actually found, because I had a moderator for my synchronous teaching, we were asked to prepare a run sheet, minute by minute. I never followed my run sheet exactly, but it made me much more organized than I typically am when I deliver classes. And I actually found that really helpful. evaluate your tools critically. The first time you do things, use very few tools, maybe a poll and chat. And that's about it. I spent a lot of time looking at all kinds of fancy stuff I could do with Prezi video and stuff like that, and ultimately decided I'm really good leading discussion, and I'm just going to do that, play to my strength. So that is my set of takeaway recommendations tied specifically to things you're going to find or have found missing as you've gone from the physical to the virtual classroom. And I really look forward to hearing what the other speakers have to add and to your questions and your observations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Glenn, for this very entertaining and very good advice. And Jada, I think that there are no specific clarification questions as far as I can tell. Yeah, so I think that we're good to go to move on.
Maybe Peter, the question that Peter asked is sort of a clarification regarding the this idea of the 15 minutes that you mentioned. So he was asking whether you would speak for more than 15 minutes in a live classroom before asking students to do something or to pose a question. If this is what you meant when you mentioned the 15 minutes.
So in the physical classroom, I might go 20. 15 is I suppose 15 is the outside. I probably cut everything 5 minutes back in the online classroom. One of the other differences is because it's harder for students to intervene, I'm more likely to take a break and specifically say, are there any questions? Because I find when I'm teaching live, people are very likely to just hold up hands if the moment they have something they don't understand. And so I think that's one of the bigger differences.
Thank you.
All right. Shall we move on to Anu then?
Okay, let me quickly share my screen. Okay, so hello everybody. My name is Anu Vadhwa. I'm at Imperial College Business School. And so Glenn spoke to you a little bit about synchronous teaching, and he primarily took the challenges that students face and what offered solutions, what he could do about those. My brief was to talk about asynchronous teaching primarily, and this builds upon a bespoke platform that we use at Imperial College to do our teaching online. And so the idea is to take you through the process from the faculty's point of view and the kind of preparation that goes into doing something asynchronously, which when I went into it was very difficult. So my experience compared to Glenn, I'm a newbie. I started very briefly doing an Executive MBA course, which was hybrid. And so my initial foray into this was, the course was 2.5 days in class, taught over an 8-month period. And then it had to be changed to 2 days in class over the same period. But then I was asked to say, well, the rest of the material you're supposed to do 3-hour podcasts. And I had to pretty much redo everything to fit those podcasts in at the right places. The part that I'm going to talk about today has to do with my experience with co-teaching on the Global MBA program at Imperial College. And this is a fully online asynchronous course on corporate innovation that I co-teach with 2 other people. It's 10 weeks. So students will take 1 session or topic every week. And then we do, over all of the faculty, they do 6 live sessions, synchronous online sessions. My most recent experience, and this was during the lockdown, was with executive education. And this was again quite different, where I was in charge of a 4-day face-to-face program. And we decided, because we had enough people sign up, to move it to a 3-week program where we were doing the teaching 4 mornings every week for 3 weeks. So that was, purely synchronous with very little asynchronous part built in. So what I'm going to talk about today to you is the Global MBA Online. And the idea is to sort of take you through the process. The way that I look at this, and we are working, and this is important because of the support that we get. We're quite lucky. We have enormous support at Imperial College because we have a tech unit that's built their own bespoke learning platform. It's called Insendi. So we're not working with Canvas. We are not working with Moodle or Blackboard. So it's Insendi. And this is the second version of a platform that we've always been using. So in terms of how you prepare for this course, a lot of the work happens. There are three phases: the before, the during, and the after. And most of the work actually happens in the before. It's about a 9 to 10 month process just to prepare the course and develop it for online and make it online ready. And this involves meetings, it involves a lot of training, and it's quite an iterative process. The during is simpler because once you've prepared it, it pretty much runs on its own. The 10 weeks involve some marking and feedback to students, which is managed largely by a TA, at least in our framework. If students have questions, faculty might be asked sometimes to weigh in, but it's pretty much the TAs that manage the learning activities and the assignments. And then the faculty go in and do anywhere from 4 to 6 synchronous online live sessions. And then there's the after period, which is again pretty simple: take stock, look at the evaluations, and make the necessary tweaks for next year. So on the face of it, it sort of looks simple. And we, as I said, we do have a lot of support. We're not on our own, but it does translate to a lot of work. So let me talk a little bit about the process that we follow, which was quite a shock to me when I went into this. Of the pre-course design and development. So the assumptions that we're making here are that one course is 20 hours of face-to-face teaching, that you've already developed it, you've taught it once before, so you have that level of preparation and have thought about what you're going to do. And now you're going to teach these 20 hours in 10 sessions of 2 hours each. That's your face-to-face version of the course. What we do is for every course, we are teamed up with what is an online learning designer from the EdTech team. So we get a dedicated one for the course that's going to work with us for the 9 to 10 months. They introduce us to the technology platform, which we kind of know, but we know it in a very different sense. They introduce us to the tools that are available to us that we can use. And the first meeting is essentially for the designer to know a little bit more about your curriculum materials. What's your content? How do you assess? What types of assessments do you do? What about readings? What about activities? What are your learning outcomes? Do you need to refine them in light of what you're about to do online? And then discuss also the way you like to teach. Is it a discussion-based course? What's your pedagogical approach essentially to teaching? And then begins the real work. Essentially, there are, for any given session, so you have 10 sessions that you're preparing for. For any given session, you would work together with a learning designer and basically multiple other people in the different steps of the process. The first thing, as Glenn said, is to sort of make a run sheet or an outline of everything that you're going to do in that one session, which means you review your slides, you segment all your content into activities, and I'll show you some examples of what this might look like. You select your readings for that session, you figure out if there's an assessment that you need to do for this session. You discuss with the designer what's going to happen in the live sessions, but everything that you will do is segmented into an outline, and you know what you want to put in and how. And then the designers and the developers of the platform, they go to work. They work on the platform. So this is a new version for us as well. Before, we used to have a slightly different version where you give the designers the outline, they'll go back and build it, they'll come back to you. So it was much more iterative. And now what's happening is that you could actually build it sitting down together with one of them. So it's like very quick, you can do very quick mock-ups, prototypes, and if it doesn't work, you move on and do something different. So it's become really easy to actually develop it together with them. So the idea is, based on the outline for every session, you are going to construct a narrative for what the session is going to look like. You design the assessments. If you are going to convert any of your activities that you would do, say a discussion or a poll or whatever, into the online version, then you have to write up those things, and they'll come back to you for, well, how do you want to phrase this? How do you want to do this, that, and the other? And if there is feedback to be given to anybody, then you would make sure that you either video record that feedback and you're prepared for that, or you are prepared with some sort of text that would give some sort of cumulative feedback to the students after every activity, if that is necessary. Finally, you go into media prep and filming for any sessions that you have to record videos for. You would do a screen test, you prepare your script. This is optional. If you're comfortable speaking just like that, that's okay. If you're like me, you would say, well, I want it tightly scripted so I don't have to think about anything else because I'm thinking too much by the camera. And then you refine your slides and you go and film this. This is not as difficult. The first two parts of the process are quite time consuming. And then you repeat this process 10 times, once for every single session that you have. At the end, you do a final module review, sign off on everything. And essentially, if you've never taught on Zoom, they would give you some sort of training on how to deliver. So there's lots of Zoom workshops available for us. And you're working in this process with your key dedicated learning designer, but also other people in the EdTech team, media specialists or developers that would help you. If you wanted a bespoke session where you say, well, I want a video to be running that does X, Y, and Z, somebody's usually able to build it up as you speak the video out. So somebody will be able to make that bespoke session available to you. So that's what it looks like. So if you go online, this is what a student would see. You would see 10 sessions. You click on any one session, and these 10 sessions is one piece of the 20 hours that you're going to teach. One session looks like this. So for example, if I'm going to talk about corporate venture capital in session 7 of the course, then that session is going to be split up into anything from here. It's about 10 parts. It could be split up into about anywhere from 8 to 12 mini sessions. And then each session, do I have an example of that? No. So each session, the outline looks something like this. So you would have session 1, session 2, 7.1, 7.2, 7.3, everything. You're going to write out everything that's going to happen for the student. So this is the student's journey that you will map out. And this is sort of a rough picture that I'm showing you. It starts to get very elaborate very soon when you start filling in the content and the material. So this is what an outline of one session looks like. There's a bunch of activities that are available to us on Insendi for asynchronous delivery. So when students, and these take the place of having exercises in class or discussions in class. As Glenn already mentioned, you want to keep your mini sessions short. So the advice we got was anywhere from 5 minutes of a mini session. That's a 7.1 could be 5 minutes, a 7.2 could be 45 minutes, but you don't want to go more than that. So you want to break them out into manageable chunks. In order to keep engagement high, so if someone's been looking at the screen for like 15 minutes, you want to engage them and have them do something different. This could be, so you're sort of presenting, right? That's what you're doing. You're presenting the material. You're sometimes doing a video from your side, but for the students, you want them also to engage and practice and produce. So practice would be to do some sort of exercise to understand whether they've grasped the material. To produce something would be maybe something like group work that they could do together and upload a video or an audio that shows you what they've done, and they can share this with each other as well. So there's a bunch of different exercises that are available to us on Insendi that are already built in, and you can decide which one to use. And the learning designers really help you make that choice because they know these activities pretty well, and they'll come back and say, well, have you thought about doing it this way or the other way? So I've got examples for you. I don't know if you can see them very clearly. Let me, so you have things like discussion boards. That's very simple. You can do your videos, you can do video players. You can have students do video submissions. There are polls, voting polls, word clouds, bubble clouds. There's interactive tables. So instead of, if you have a case study, for example, and if you want the students to fill in a table, so you give them certain options and you say, well, tell me what choice would you make and why? They can actually sit and fill out a table and tell you, and then share that with the rest of the class. And every student can do that. You can have checkboxes. So the interactive tables is the top box here that you can see. The second thing with the coffee jars is an exercise trying to understand what kinds of IP is built into a product. So you would give them, after they've gone through a lecture, you would give them a checkbox exercise where they could say, well, where are the trademarks? Where are the patents in these jars? And they could actually say, well, here's an example. And they could check some boxes to try and see if they've got it right. You can have sticky notes, which is quite fun. So if you are doing a case study, you want them to go through some pros and cons, then every student can actually put sticky notes in this fashion that you see down here, the yellow and pink, to sort of give their answers, and also to compare those with what other students have written. You can obviously do quizzes. You have the facility to randomly choose 5 questions for any given student, and they can try those out. They can be marked if that's the case. But there's a bunch of different things that you can do in these activities that are already built in, and we can, on the go, we can try them out when we're building it and see if it looks fine. If not, then we can change it. So that's very, very useful. The key challenges that one faces in something like this, first of all, translating the classroom material online is not as simple as one would think. My idea of going in was, well, they're going to just record me and they're going to throw every video online. And that's not the case, because you need to have a conversation with the learning designer. Their mind shift is, there needs to be a mindset shift from thinking about this as a course where you decide what you're doing, to taking some inputs from them and refining the way that that students receive the course material, and thinking of it as a very different process. You have to be prepared for a lot of fact checking. This is an asynchronous course. That means everything that's online needs to be fact checked and appropriately cited, which is a bit of work in itself. The nature of the classroom is, once I finished the process, I was thinking, well, now they could stand up an actor instead of me, and they could deliver this class. I don't need to be there after I've done all this work. So how do you sort of make these relationships with your students that you would normally do face-to-face was a big challenge. How do you put your stamp on your online class? That was a little bit different. And Glenn already touched upon the classroom dynamics. There is a way to read body language and a way to ask a question when you see a student's not getting it. That becomes really, really difficult when you're doing this online. Managing the time that you spend on teaching becomes another problem, because this is an on-demand course. Students can do their one session any time of the week that they like. And so they're learning 24/7. Are you going to be available 24/7? What's your process to answer questions that pop up any time of the day? What do you do? So you have to be prepared to have thought through all of this and manage those expectations. And again, Glenn touched upon this point about clarity of instructions as well. You're not there all the time. You're not there most of the time. And they're going through this material as though they were with you. And so they really have to feel like someone's holding their hand and everything's very clear in the group posts. Maybe you can put up some posts that set up expectations, but also explain things clearly. And frequently asked questions is a very good idea once you've taught this course once at least. And then finally, this was a big challenge for me, was getting comfortable in front of the camera in this day and age of Zoom. I think we're getting better. I'm getting better, but really understanding what your online delivery style is, what makes you more comfortable, how do you deal with the camera, that's something that I personally felt uncomfortable with, and maybe others do too. And some others are perfectly fine with that. So my 4 takeaways, I know I'm a little bit over time and I'll be quick with this. So the basic idea is asynchronous, synchronous, face-to-face. These are my 4 T's. The basic principles of good teaching will still apply. You have to be prepared to spend a lot of time, all of this process for asynchronous teaching is going to be front loaded. And all the time that you spend on designing it right is going to be worth it. And no matter what you think, in terms of the time, it's always going to take more time than you thought if you do it right. Teaching support is extremely crucial, both in terms of the training that you would get from the learning designers, the kind of support that you get from the platform. So things like, do you have a moderator? Do you have a co-pilot? When you're doing synchronous sessions is quite important. Teaching assistants are worth their weight in gold, so get a good one and stick with them. You have to understand technology and tools better. I discover every day I discover new activities that I could potentially use that I should have used in the first place. So I think that's really important, is to have a good platform, someone who understands how to use it and to learn from them. And finally, and this could be a source of frustration, not just for faculty, but also for the learning designers. I mean, we tend to think of learning designers, people tend to think of them as another IT person who's there to help you. Well, that's not true. Most of these people will actually tell you they are not very IT savvy. They have PhDs and have chosen not to go into academia. So they understand teaching very well. So it's really, the idea is you need to have a good collaboration with the learning designer. They do have a lot of things to teach us. And if we are a good student, then our students will be the better for it. And with this, thank you very much. If you have questions, I'm here to answer them later on. I know I've overstepped a little bit my time, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you would have.
Thank you very much, Anu. This was very useful and also greatly complementary to what Glenn has presented. We have quite a few questions, and we also are still waiting for our third speaker. He was coming out of teaching, so he might be held up by students either on another Zoom call. He confirmed that he will be here, and in fact, he's coming. That's great. So, but Jada, please fire away with a few clarification questions, and then we'll move over to Chris.
Yes, actually, Anu, let me ask you one. So Murat is asking, you use the term student journey, and this sounds interesting. So can you please clarify what you mean by it and whether there is more to it than a teaching plan?
So I think I would say it's a very fleshed out version of your teaching plan. So when you have your teaching plan and your syllabus, you would say, well, what should students know when they come in? What should they have done when they come into a session? What are we going to do? And I like to think of it in 10-minute segments for synchronous, but also in terms of learning for the student. You have to think of it as what the student comes in, what they should know to do before they come in, what should they have read already, what questions should they have prepared. Is this all clear on the website? Do they understand this? And that's more than just making a teaching plan, which kind of tells them, yeah, this is what we might do in class, but then this is a little bit more of hand-holding. It's more of putting a thread through every single part of your session and to tie them together so that A, you're not repeating yourself, B, everything is connected together. All your examples work out. There are no glitches in when they're trying to attempt something. At the end, they should walk away having had a seamless experience. So it really is a very, very fleshed out, extremely detailed version of the teaching plan. That's how I would put it. And thinking of it from the perspective of the student.
Thank you. And also maybe I'll ask another one, given we have seconds. So Pinar was actually curious about how often you update the asynchronous material once you have created it.
So the advice was you don't want to update too much. You obviously have to update any old examples with new ones. So we taught this last summer. Then we had a meeting. We did update the text-based activities, some of them. Some of the examples were updated, but the videos, because we were given good advice, we kept them so general that there was no need to update that. They were mostly on the material. More conceptual. So, and any examples that you would give or you want to change, you would do that just below that video, let's say, and then engage the students in thinking of new examples or adding them in. And the media specialist can do quite a bit with cutting and snipping, but this time we didn't change anything with the videos, but we did make, let's say, about 15 to 20% changes to the content, to the rest of the content in some way or the other.
Okay, thank you. I'll keep the
Wonderful.
other one later.
Thank you, Anu, and thanks, Jado. So we have Chris, who just joined us. Welcome, Chris, and you're on. We're looking forward to what you have to say about online teaching experiences.
Well, thanks everybody for waiting. This has been a wild ride here in the UNC today. I'm glad to see a lot of old friends. Ita, I'm glad to see you're still awake there, and Pinar too, with the time difference, and Glenn. I'm glad to be able to talk about this. It's been an interesting time, and I'm happy to share some thoughts, since I was actually teaching some military folks yesterday for the first time in masks, and that was kind of interesting. And then today all online, a different military group. So it's I'm happy to talk a little bit about that too. It's not necessarily undergrads or MBAs, but if we want to get into that executive audience. So let me share just a few thoughts, and hopefully there'll be something of value to this group as we chat. So when I was little, my grandma told this joke. I must have heard it like 100 times. And the joke went something like this. There's this group of people that are on this Viking ship, and they've been out at sea for months. And one day the captain comes to them and he says, "Man, I've got some good news and I've got some bad news." And they're like, "Well, tell us the good news first." And he's like, all right. The good news is you're all going to get a new change of underwear. And they're like, "Yes, woo." And he's like, "All right, settle down. Now the bad news. The bad news is, Bill, you changed with Bob. Bob, you changed with Fred. Fred, you changed with so-and-so." And my grandma it's like, it was all she could do to get to the end of this joke. And again, I probably heard it 100 times, but she just thought it was the greatest joke ever. So there's some good news and there's some bad news as it relates to maybe online education. And there's a lot here, but it's becoming a lot more prevalent, right? I mean, you can find any number of studies that just show the uptick in this, and this is especially true in the last couple months, but this is big. This is big, and more people are turning to online. So that's sort of the good news, but it's also the bad news. And the reason why is, we talk about this all the time as sort of strategy folks, is that anytime there's sort of a growth market and some people are earning above average profits, well, it attracts competition and people sort of rush in. And the other reason it's sort of bad news is because of the way that we're approaching it. And so when we're approaching online education, and again, I don't want this to be an extreme, but I do want this to be a little bit provocative, is that we're approaching it from a teaching point of view, and not a consulting point of view. And sort of to back up this point, I was down in Miami maybe last year, and there was a large organization down there that UNC was working with. And I said to the head of learning and development, I said, who else were you considering besides UNC when you were looking at this program? And he said, "Well, sit down with me for a second." So we sat down on the couch, he pulled up his spreadsheet, and there was UNC, and UNC was the only academic institution. Everybody else in that spreadsheet were consulting firms, like boutique and large ones. And it made me realize that increasingly we're going to be competing with a lot of these consulting folks. Now, this is also relevant because teaching is often sort of a push model, but if we can, start to think a little bit more like a consultant for our online education, I think we'll have higher value. And honestly, if you think about it from a rate perspective, teachers don't make a lot of money. Consultants make a lot more money. So then you start moving from teaching value to consulting value. And what you're really doing is trying to spend more time grappling with problems and helping people apply stuff at a level that's really important to them, rather than sort of just pushing and teaching. So So here's just some thoughts about what we can maybe do to start to think a little bit more like a consultant. And I apologize because I know I'm repeating some of the stuff that Anu and Glenn have said. I didn't get to see a lot of the materials, but I know I'm just reiterating some points, but that's okay. Like a good researcher, when you start to see convergence on a few points, it makes that point that much more salient. So if you've heard it before, just chalk it up to a good practice. The asynchronous material, shorter chunks. So we did, like last year, I filmed this course in conjunction with Fortune, and the chunks literally were 2 to 3 minutes. They would go like 2 or 3 minute chunks, and that's about it, right? And then there was usually a question, something to engage. Now I realize that we can't all do that, but what I'm not saying is having a 45-minute lecture that you just did on Zoom, or an hour lecture, or an hour, that's just, it's not working. And you've probably heard that before, and also not very long in total. And so, I've kind of heard people say, like, if you're kind of looking at a day, more than about 3 hours of this stuff, and people are just tapped out. So just be aware of the way that you're creating this, and then the total package in general. Focused and informed. What I mean by that is, a lot of times this asynchronous material, it's just a chance for you, because there's no questions kind of coming at you. You can just kind of let go, and it's pretty broad. But the challenge is it's hard to remember it. And so again, like a good job talk, you've got to focus on just a few things and drive those things home. Now, this is actually where I think we have the advantage over the consultants. And this gets to the informs point right here. What the consultants don't get that we do is the logic, the why for things, why things actually happen the way that they do. They don't get that. Just to give you an example, I had a paper that came out in ASQ about a year ago on sort of accelerators and their practices and why some perform better than others. Well, in one of our findings, it was about whether it's good to kind of stay as a founding team for all the events, or whether to split up and break up. And we shared it with one of the founders of Techstars. And he said, you know what, I have always wondered about this question, and I always thought that this was the right answer, but I never really understood why. So it's this logic piece that comes from looking at lots of companies, lots of time periods, lots of situations, lots of environments, that allows us to sort of have an edge on the consultants. The consultants don't do that. So I think it's focused, a few topics, and then kind of really helping people understand the logic for why things are happening. And then applied and personal, especially on the asynchronous. If it's not applied and personal, it's a YouTube video, right? I mean, there's so much competition out there that unless you can kind of make this come alive for them at a personal level, and there's lots of different ways that you can do this, downloading sort of a grid that they can fill out, answering assignments, and you can do it pretty cheaply too. I mean, you could just have sort of Word documents or Excel documents that they fill out along the way. But it's got to be applied. If not, then it's just going to fall by the wayside. And I think that was maybe one of the lessons from the MOOCs, is that the MOOCs never really got on because there wasn't something kind of pulling people in at a personal level, no sort of accountability. So that's maybe on the before. The during. So on the synchronous, this makes sense, but it's got to be personal. And you've probably heard this before, but there's got to be a human element in this. We're social people. We need to connect with individuals, and we need to use the synchronous session as a way to just kind of connect at that human level. So this is a review that one undergraduate wrote for one of the professors in our area that was teaching core strategy at the undergrad level. And what you can see is just that there's this human element. Yeah, he went above and beyond, and I don't like this idea of maybe having office hours every single day or writing my own review of articles. But the spirit is that, just as this last line says, he set a great culture within the class, being both professional and personal. So create that culture, connect with people, really understand them. It's sort of a trite phrase, but no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. I mean, just kind of connect with people at the personal level, which I think is really important. A lot of people are struggling right now. on many fronts, and we can help them. And you've all had individuals like that in your office. But I think one of the real values that we can have is just kind of connecting with people. Again, focused. We want these synchronous sessions, at least in my point of view. It's a time to double down on something that was presented in the synchronous and in the asynchronous. And often for me, it's the chance to double down at a different level. So it's like what we know about learning is that the more you do something, the better you get at it. And so it's another chance to practice, but you're varying the practice element in a way that actually allows them to have even greater benefit. It's not just practicing it again at the individual level with a slightly different context. For me, it might be like in the asynchronous, here's a concept. Now, how would this apply for you in the workplace? Or how could it apply to you as a leader if you're maybe an undergrad and you don't have a lot of work experience, but you want to get it into the world? And I often find that async is really good to push stuff at the personal level because they have an incentive to apply it because there's some benefit to them at the personal level. Whereas if the application is at sort of a group or team level, they may disengaged. By contrast to the sync, I often like it at the collective level. So, all right, you've done this at the individual. Now let's adjust it for org realities where you've got hierarchies and status and power. So how would you adjust this? How would you work with people? So you take the framework, but then you're helping them kind of apply it at a different level. I think it needs to be fresh. This cannot just be Zoom. This cannot just be Zoom popping people into Zoom windows. You've got to come up with some other sort of things. So whether it's the polling, whether it's Mentimeter, whether it's Jamboards, whether it's Google Docs, and a lot of this stuff is very low tech. The one I was just doing with, I'm using Mentimeter and Jamboards and Google Docs and polling, none of which is very sophisticated, but it's fresh, right? You just want to keep it fresh and keep moving. You want people kind of logging in saying, I wonder what's going to happen today. I wonder what we're going to use today versus, oh boy, another Zoom session. And so just kind of try to find ways to make it fresh. You can take a picture of this. A lot of this I'm just stealing shamelessly from my communications colleagues. We don't talk a whole lot about this, as strategy people, but there are some really great best practices in terms of your clothing, the camera. You probably know this, but you got to look right at the camera. If we're looking at the people, so I have you off the side, you can see that I'm not looking at the camera. I'm looking at all of you. Well, that's totally different than if I'm sort of looking at the camera, but it's kind of hard to talk if you're looking right at the camera and kind of look at your notes too. The foreground, background, we know that. I often have deers kind of in the front of my yard. I've got two small dogs that can make noises. I obviously don't want them in here. Sit up straight, don't fidget. If your feet don't touch the ground, maybe have some books that you can put your feet on. And in the camera, look at the camera about 50% of the time. So this is some basic stuff, but it's almost like, so my son went to a job interview. He's 17, he got a job interview. So he went to the job interview and I saw him walking out and I'm like, are you dressed like that? You're crazy. Like, you got to come on, like put on a good shirt and you're all wrinkly. I mean, you look like a disaster. We can kind of kill it with just these small things. This is sort of just setting the stage for us to be able to deliver well. Consultants don't come in looking frumpy. They're polished and that presence makes a big difference for how a message is received. And then just after, oops, let's see, did I go too far? After. So the holy grail of education is follow-up. Follow-up is what allows concept and ideas to stick. A lot of times we do assignments on the front end, like here's a case, it's in the async, read it over, answer the questions, come to the sync session prepared to share. Well, that's fine. A different approach. I'm increasingly moving away from cases. I personally am not a big fan of cases. They're often outdated and they're totally disconnected from most people's reality. So make your own case. And the way you make your own case is find an idea, especially from your own research, that can connect with these people and have them grapple with it at the personal level. So the way that I'm kind of moving forward on a lot of this stuff is there's the async, the sync we're going to apply at a different level. At the end of that sync session, they've got to apply this at the personal level. They got to take the central idea. And I'm just focusing on just a few ideas. Take it, apply it, write a write-up on it. And this is where you want the feedback of others. It's this learn, do, share. Write it up. You've got to share it with one or two people, get some feedback, and then revise it and get it back in. And so it's kind of reinforcing the group and the social dynamic that's really important. So I'm increasingly doing stuff on the back end and tapping into the power of the class and the group to reinforce ideas. So let me just stop there. I know there was a bunch of stuff kind of flying at you, and I'm happy to field any comments, questions, critiques.
Thank you, Chris. Jada, shall we start with some of the clarification questions if you have any?
Maybe there is something that is, it's for everyone, but I think fits very well here after Chris' presentation, given that you told us a lot about keeping the students engaged, being available, etc. And Catherine is asking, teaching synchronously can be very exhausting, especially if there are no activated cameras on the other side from some of the students, and you can't read the room. So how do you motivate students to activate the camera? Do you have best practices on how to stay motivated? Also you as a lecturer.
And this is where I think we might all have experience, but I think, so I'm a parent, I've got a bunch of kids. I find that my kids listen less to me and they listen more to their siblings. And so tap into the peer effect. You know, I remember PhD seminars where, you know, like Woody Powell would actually have a student run it every week. And Woody was just kind of kicking back. You know, he'd offer commentary here and there, but he wasn't really doing much. The peer effect is really powerful. So you can actually promote someone to lead, to open it up, share a thought. Hey, here's something in the news that kind of reinforces or illustrates what we were talking about. Get them up front and center. The great irony of teaching is the less you talk, the better it goes. And so just get people talking. You know, I think we feel like this need to cover the gap and to talk and elaborate and expound and exhort. But the more you can get other people to do it, the better it's going to go for you. And that's especially true with more experience. Like the more experience, the less you want to talk. You're just the router. So that's just one idea.
In terms of students turning on the camera, I ask. Now, I read one of the things we've been reading about is the fact that a lot of private circumstance that's concealable when people come to school is not concealable when they're in their bedroom with their computer. So I don't insist, but I strongly encourage. Part of the advantage of going 5 to 10 minutes and saying break into groups for 5 minutes, talk about this, and then come back is you can sit down and relax or go brew coffee during that 5 minutes. So breaking it up, it really serves you. I will often teach standing up. The disadvantage is the danger of fidgeting. But I find if I'm doing in big blocks like I unfortunately had to this year, I remain much more energetic that way. But one of the reasons to break it up into small groups is to manage your own energy.
Can I just, and Pinar kind of put in a thing about with the students. I find it helpful, and this is where we actually have an advantage as strategy people. Strategy is about, you know, being different in a competitively advantageous way, right? Everybody's got a personal strategy going on. And so if you can take it to say, look, I'm here to teach some concepts and some principles of how some firms outperform others, but you're trying to do the same at the personal level. And you're all trying to deal with that. And if I can help you at that level, if we can take some of these ideas and apply them to you in your journey, in your struggle. So having these little office hours are really helpful. So for example, take RBV. Like, what are your friend resources? Like, what are you leveraging that's unique? How are you exploiting that? How is it helping you enter growth markets? Right? I mean, all this stuff that we teach, it's so relevant at the personal level. And if you just offer to have these conversations with people, they will take you up on it. So almost every single class, about the hour before class, I'm having a few of these one-on-ones. I usually keep it for a half hour. For me, that's, you know, I like them these half-hour increments, but I'll just do one-on-ones. And then we just talk about it. And it's surprising how much they just want to talk about their life and how the concept sort of applies to them, and just get some general instruction, right?
I completely agree with Chris and Glenn about, a standing desk. I've used that for my own energy levels. I encourage students for the camera, but I don't insist. The only time I would insist, just piggybacking on other colleagues' experiences, is with undergrads maybe, or less experienced students, because, and especially with large classes where certain faculty discovered that students were there but not really there. They would just keep their cameras off and wander off. And she started to take, this faculty member started to take attendance, and she realized 20 students were missing, which is not great for when you're sending people to breakout rooms, because there could be a student who ends up there alone. So you really want to decide what experience level you're teaching to, and adjust. For executives, they are quite motivated, they're fine. And in that case, if it's 4 a.m. they're not likely to want to show their face, and that's fine. But I would say there are circumstances that require you to have students put their cameras on.
Thank you. Pinar, should we continue with questions? How do you want to proceed?
So our host has kindly asked us to take a photo, and just this kind of follows nicely the turn your camera on request. So before we continue, and I know for some of you it's getting late, especially in continental Europe. So if you don't mind turning on your camera for just a few seconds, we'll take a picture. I think Peter is in charge of that. So Peter, please guide us.
Yes, I'm still waiting for people to turn on their video.
Mm-hmm. I see a lot more faces. They all look awake, which is a good news.
So you don't have to be afraid. It's just going to be one picture of everyone, which means that individually we will not be the focus of this. Okay, can we see a few more people turn on the camera, or are we going to call it? Okay, great. So just like in a regular classroom, some folks have tuned out. Okay, I'm going to take the first one right now. One moment.
Do you want us to wave or something?
Okay, you can also all wave. Yes, please wave. Try it.
All right.
Okay, wave. Very good. Excellent. Okay, I took a photo. This is pretty good. I
Wonderful.
think this is probably as good as it gets.
Great. Over to you, Jada, for more questions.
So I'll start with the more general ones, okay? Because I think those actually are of interest to all the speakers, and maybe we can have a little conversation. So this follows with the students' engagement that we were talking about. And Li Wei is pointing at the fact that basically we miss the equivalent of body language a lot of times on platforms, like in the case of Zoom. And you cannot catch when a student is losing focus or attention, and somehow just look at the student, and this could make a difference. So she was wondering whether there's anything that you feel may produce a similar effect on Zoom, even if you do breakouts, so you cannot be in all the rooms at the same time. So how do you manage that, or do you have any tips to share in that respect?
It's a tough one. I think the best I've discovered to do is try to be engaging, and to Chris's point, leverage the class dynamics. You know, if you're putting them in short breakout sessions, 5 minutes, discuss this, or 10 minutes, watch this little video, discuss these 2 questions, come back. The variety and the working with each other, I find, does a tremendous amount to keeping them engaged. That's the best I've come up with.
Yeah, body language is difficult for me as well. It's very difficult to figure this out. One thing that I would do sometimes is it's very handy when you know a little bit about the students, and I usually keep that sheet with me. And oftentimes I would just throw in a question, cold calling a little bit, but it's still, I bet, yeah, you're cold calling, but you're sort of asking them to share their experience based on what you know of their background. But it's still not being able to read somebody. Is just encouraging conversation outside of the breakout rooms.
Sometimes just spurring it with a little bit of text. You know, okay, everybody write this in the chat. You know, just getting them to engage initially, because then you can see in the chat and pull them out. Oh, that was an interesting thing. You know, what would you like to say about that? Can you expand on that point? And then they'll often flip the camera on. So you bait them with the chat sometimes, and then they can come out because they'll want to kind of come alive usually. Or you can say, hey, you know, we can't really quite see you. You know, put your camera on, and that's a perfect time for them to talk. You know, they're illustrating their point. So that's one way too.
Okay, another one. What about case discussions online? I know I mean, for instance, Glenn touched upon it, the fact that you have reduced the number of cases and you maybe use them for multiple purposes so that actually you can leverage the same material for different classes. But do you have any particular recommendation on how to discuss cases online?
Like Chris, particularly in the asynchronous, I'm using fewer cases than I used to. The reference to, and you know, if I'm going to use a case, I might use it for multiple purposes. But I used one case for my innovation class. Other than that, it was shorter, sharper material. And I think also it was Australia relevant material, which is a real problem with cases. They tend to be old and North American, which is not appreciated everywhere. But when you compound intensity with Zoom fatigue, the quality of discussion you're going to get out of a case, I think, is probably pretty low if you try to do multiple ones. So, you know, I did one. I probably steered it with questions a little more assertively than I normally would. I wanted to be sure we got the questions, because one of the other things I've discovered, and be curious if others have done it, synchronous online moves at about 80% the speed of synchronous in the classroom. And I can't tell you why. I just find that things take longer. So I've been pulling stuff out, which is probably, to Chris's point, made my teaching better because it's more focused.
I haven't done cases synchronously, but what we do on the asynchronous material, we do cases, but they are not used for so much discussion. The idea is to sort of let them read the case material. It's almost acts as an example to then draw out some concepts that you want them to. And so one of my cases, for example, in my mini session on corporate venture capital would really be all about having them see what different companies, how they manage their programs. And then I would actually have them go out and find new companies and figure out on some dimensions how those companies are managing their programs. And then the questions in the case would be, which they have to prepare in a group, would be all about, well, what are the differences you see? Why do you think you see these differences? And then we often, for any cases that we do, we usually have a live session associated with it. And the idea is to then for a TA to sort of, or for us to have a summary of what the responses look like. The TA would prepare them in nice charts for you. And then you could go through, spend very little time telling them, here's how you guys answered. What did you miss? What are some additional points that you could have thought about? But then also use that time to sort of bring in your own research, as Chris said, you know, then talk about what's going on now and what sorts of other things that they can based on that case, what are the other concepts that they can take away? How can they use this if they had to in their own companies? So really use it as a means to discuss other things, but it's a lot of push and pull. So you have to think quite a bit about what you want to do with the case, which is not quite the same as you would do in a face-to-face classroom.
You also might
sometimes.
Go ahead, sorry. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say one more thing. It usually helps, even if it's an outdated case. We've been lucky to find a couple people. For example, we've been able to find a P&G employee. He used to manage one of the technical divisions at P&G. And so when we do the spin brush case, anytime anyone does the spin brush case, we call him as the guest speaker in that session. So we've found a way to do that. So it usually helps to have guest speakers related to the case come in. Sorry, Chris, I just wanted to get that point in.
I think that's a great one. A lot of times the cases, or at least the industry, you're going to have alums, right? So case in point, many of us have taught the Cola Wars case ad nauseum. We've got a whole army of UNC grads at Coke. And so they're more than happy to come back and give their perspective. And so tap into your alumni database, figure out where the people are. It may not be the exact company, but you can certainly get the industry and you can zoom them in. I mean, that's a nice thing. Even if you're teaching 4 sections, they're fine popping in the last 15 minutes. I've done that a lot. And the students think they're presenting to their colleagues, and then all of a sudden, boom, there's the senior VP, there's the CEO, there's president, whatever, popping in. They like it. You can what I do is I reframe a lot of the questions in the case when I bring these people in, and I make the questions more relevant to the participants so that they're getting something out of it. For example, with Coke, a lot of one of my questions recently was, how do you compete with these new craft sodas, the craft beers that are going up? I mean, that's relevant. I mean, that's where they're really grappling it. Now, that's not in the Coke case, but Coke and Pepsi are certainly dealing with it. So you can adjust the question slightly to make it a consultative experience for the executives popping in. And then you can also there's lots of questions that are kind of written. You all have seen these in the teaching notes for the cases. Some of them are more geared towards participation than others. So I think if you've got 2 or 3 or 4 just really good questions, you're kind of golden for your case, but try to pick the ones that are going to allow for dialogue, discussion, role play, debate. So you just could be a little bit more judicious about the questions that you use.
Thanks. We have a couple of questions on how to adapt tools that we usually use in the classroom for the online environment. So for instance, Elena is asking about and some activity, some platform or website that you can use in order to have basically students write in front of the entire class. So as if you were calling them to write on the whiteboard and everyone in the class could see it, whether there's something that you can use for that purpose. I think Chris was pointing at something that maybe works. And something else related to students' presentation. So do you actually have them present in front of the class, and do you do it in the usual way that you would do it in a regular class?
So what we've done on the student presentations, on the async version, what we have them do sometimes is to upload videos. So these would be short videos. So they do some piece of group work, and then maybe they have slides which they can upload as well. That could be another alternative, but we would have them upload very short videos that everyone can see. We've done this also in executive settings where if they were given a challenge, let's say a design challenge, then they've been asked to upload their video because there's a lot of learning that they can have by looking at what the approach that every group used. So when the only time that we've done this is when the sharing has been useful to the students and they really want to see each other's videos as well. But it's uploading, not doing it in class, online.
To Chris's point, I think simple technologies are a good thing. I'm not generally a fan of the Google suite of packages for like ongoing work, but for in class, it works great. And the fact that students can share their screens also means sometimes you can just leave it to them, you know, throw together 4 slides. I don't care what package you do it in, as long as you can share your screen with it. Miro, M-I-R-O, has an interesting range of things if you want to toss them into a brainstorming session or such. Pretty straightforward. Those are things I've done.
Yeah, I don't really have anything substantive to add.
Okay, so some questions specific for some of the speakers. So for instance, this is for Glenn. You were talking about these videos that you record in order to give feedback regarding assignments and that you post. So one of the people was asking whether you would say that giving feedback during class is less valuable or helpful compared to having this short video that you record and you post somewhere. So do you prefer to do the video for some specific reason?
Right. So the video I was using when I was teaching asynchronously. So there wasn't the synchronous option for feedback. But I think with the student, but if I were teaching a less intense synchronous program than what I just got done teaching, I think it could still be a useful tool. Again, it provide, if people regularly made the same error, getting them something 2 days after they turned it in, so it's actually fresh, so they remember what the assignment was, is I think pedagogically helpful. And I think the students appreciate the immediacy. And there's a distinct difference between what I do, you know, in studio, doing it nicely, versus, you know, this is my backyard. You know, when I was doing at ASU, I'm wearing my ASU shirt, and the students appreciate that it's just, hey, I'm taking 10 minutes here to give you feedback on the work you did. So I've used it with asynchronous. If it became clear after the fact that something hadn't worked in a synchronous, I might toss that in.
Thank you. Another question for everyone. On average, how many group projects do you have in an online undergraduate or MBA class?
Okay, we're going to wait each other out. It totally depends on the length of the class, and also I'd encourage you to think about formal and informal. You know, I did, and I'm not quite sure on that question. During 90 minutes, I might ask the students to work in groups 4 times of different lengths. Might be more, might be a little less, but it would depend. But yeah, but, you know, think about variety. Give them variety. Sometimes it's, you know, 5 minutes, quick, go think about this idea, come back. Sometimes it's, we're going to take 30 minutes off, watch this 15 minutes of video, and then have 15 minutes of really deeper discussion. Just break it up.
I may just add, so I just want to say amen to what Glenn said, but sometimes it depends on the school. Like, you know, often the undergrad or the MBA will actually have some percentages on how much can be group. You know, students can get pretty concerned about how much of their grade is tied to group assignments. So I can't remember, so don't quote me on this, but I can't remember, like our MBA program, like an MBA core, when I was teaching the strategy core, if it was like 25%, no more than 25% is group, or no more than 30% is group. So there are some bounds, right? And so you may just want to clarify that, because that can help on the formal side. With like Glenn on the informal, I love it. Yep, I'm with you 100%.
So we have that sort of percentage. It's encouraged to have individual and group exercises. So we really have to keep to that. So I would say on the formal pieces of work, we would have maybe one pretty decent group project, decently big group project in the entire 10-session module that I talked about. There would be one substantial piece of individual assessment as well. But then on the informal side, every one of the 10 sessions in this course would have, let's say, about 5 to 6 times that students are supposed to interact with the platform. And some of these interactions would be group-based and others would be individual. And again, some of them are assessed, some are not. Assessed for participation and some are not. So it varies. It's really, they like to mix it up. And what we found was that the more we put, we had about 8 pieces for every session, where eight times that they would interact with the platform, and the students found it too much. So we reduced it this time to 6, and they seem to be managing fine. These are informal touch points where they engage with either their group or individually with the platform. The formal stuff is still the same. One substantial individual and one substantial group exercise.
Okay, I have a question myself. So some of us in the fall are going to transition to a hybrid setting where we will have some students in presence and some students who are actually following our lectures online. And I find this incredibly challenging in terms of how to somehow make sure that all the students are equally involved, that there's no Series A and Series B kind of students in the classroom. I don't know whether any of you has had already some experience, or whether based on your experiences that you have any tips that you want to share with those of us who are going to face a similar situation.
I'll just say that I think it stinks. I think from a pedagogical perspective, I think it's the pits. You know, we've run some pilots here and it's not good. I mean, like we just did some pilots this last week. You know, you're in the room with a third, half the people, everybody's spread out, everybody's wearing their masks. You've got the Zoom. They can't see the class. They cannot see everybody in the class. All they see is the professor. It's just, and then you've got, of course, the moderator that's kind of managing the chat room and trying to make the connections. Again, I understand the logic. From a revenue model, you kind of got to have it, but from a pedagogical point of view, I think it's a disaster. So you know where my biases are on this one. But I understand the perspective of the school, and I don't think, and again, maybe it's just me, I didn't think I understood the revenue model of universities as well as I have in the last couple of months. They make money off of expensive residences and meal plans and high parking and athletic events. So they've got to have people in. I understand it. It's an existential crisis at a lot of these schools, but it's just not great from a teaching point of view. So I'm just hearing lots and lots of concerns, and we're still in the pilot phase. So I haven't done the high flex is kind of what we're calling it here, but just lots of concerns in early pilots.
I would share that concern. The one piece I would offer, if what you've got is, when we get to the stage where perhaps we can be more physically present, but there are 1 or 2 students who perhaps for a medical reason don't feel they can expose themselves. In my last year or 2 at ASU, we had a telepresence robot available for students to reserve. Imagine essentially an iPad on a Segway. And it sounds dippy, but it worked really well in that the student could actually wheel around and be part of a group discussion even. It was a little, there's a bit of an uncanny valley effect, but that was a tool that ASU chose to make available for the small number of students not being able to be present. But I think, yeah, I understand why schools are talking about doing it. I think it's a really, pedagogically, I think it stinks.
Agree with Chris and Glenn, nothing more to add. We're still doing our preparations on that, so we'll see how that works out. I
think in some schools, they're asking to split up the classroom such that you teach once physically and then once, you know, go home and or to your office and teach to your online students. So replicating the class in smaller chunks, which is also another pain, of course.
I mean, Peter, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'd love to hear, I think a lot of us are dealing with a similar issue that you raised. Again, pedagogically, in some ways it makes sense to just do it all online. Universities, schools are pushing back, sometimes gently, sometimes not so gently on that. Any advice that you would have for the rest of us?
Yeah, so for the reason that you just all cited, I didn't want to do it in this hybrid mode. And I had a pretty large class, large meaning about 55 students. And so I essentially contacted the program head and said, look, either find me a room where we can do social distancing, you know, Swiss rules, which means the room has to be for about 10 people, or let me go online and I'm going to give my room to other classes which are much smaller. So if your class is like 25, and then they can do social distancing. So I try to appeal to the rationality. Let's move the larger classes online and have the smaller ones, you know, physically. So then the university can still, you know, have its cake and eat it too, right? We have to be on campus, but we are not forcing everyone to go into this hybrid mode, which we all agree is a mess. You know, and my program director, you know, after the university couldn't find me a room for all sessions, you know, for 110 people, my program director said, it's fine. You know, so I think appealing to, I don't know if it works in your context, but I try to appeal to the rationality. Let's actually, yeah, let's try to bring students in classroom, but let's do it in a way where we can do social distancing. So let's move the larger class, including mine, online. And if I taught a smaller class, I would be happy to do it physically. But, you know, I think we want to avoid forcing people into this hybrid mode, which, you know, as we all discussed, is very difficult. So bottom line is talk to your program director, the person who's actually in charge of your program. That person needs to take it up with the higher ups.
Yeah, and again, I'll just speak kind of candidly and personally that a lot of universities have percentages on how much can be online, how much can be residential. In order to say this is a residential experience, we need to be able to literally say this many classes, and then that can get a little tricky. In the US, you've got, you know, you're applying to EOC and then get for health reasons, but if it's not health reasons, you know, maybe you're living with someone or you're just not comfortable. It's a long, complicated process, and it does get a little contested. I agree with you though, that for a lot of reasons that process may make a lot of sense.
Okay, so we have no more questions.
So we are coming to the end of our session. Thank you so much, our panelists. This was such a wonderful experience. I learned a lot, and I'm sure that the rest of the audience has as well. Any last words, any parting words of advice or anything to say before we close?
Thank you very much for pulling this together. Again, really appreciated. I learned a lot last year. I learned a lot this year. And good luck, everyone.
Thank you again to the organizers for having me. And it's been, as Glenn said, I've learned a lot every single time.
Yeah, echoing those sentiments. I think there's going to be a shakeout of schools. I think it's going to be a very interesting period of time. And it's going to be a sad period. That's going to affect a lot of institutions, especially maybe liberal arts colleges, where there's a lot of underrepresented minorities. It's not going to be great. I think that it's going to be a time when we're done, there's going to be a huge resurgence of demand for face-to-face. On our executive development, there people are doubling down, tripling down on stuff in a year. And so I think people will realize what this is useful for online and where it actually has its limits. And so I'm very hopeful. you know, for the future. I really am. And I'm still just really grateful that we have this profession. It's still the loophole in society. Absolutely. I was in the classroom for the first time yesterday after months. I loved it, even though I'm wearing that Darth Vader mask on. I mean, I loved it. I was so happy to be back. I didn't think that I would miss it that much. I was terrified of the mask. I thought I was just gonna be sweating buckets because I'd done this before, and how's this gonna work with the group interaction and everybody else wearing masks? And it was great because everybody wants to be there. And so we've got a great profession, and I'm trying to put that in perspective. I was talking with a friend, I know I'm kind of waxing on, but you know, she's been working at Burger King for 22 years with a mask recently at the kitchen, you know, at the oven, you know, with the, you know, I'm like, my goodness, I have nothing to complain about. So I'm grateful that social comparison continues to be a very powerful theory of human behavior, and we've got it good. So thanks for having us.
Thank you. And I think that a few people have asked for your slide. So if you're okay with it, I'll go ahead and share after the session. We'll put it on the STR website. And also thank you, my co-organizers and the STR division for the help. And good night. Have a wonderful day if you're back in the West. And thank you for joining.
Bye, thanks.
Bye.